What I have found as I've worked within this field of complex trauma and addiction for the last 16 years is that there's really three important pieces for healing from complex trauma. So the first one is an educational self-awareness, where you begin to understand your complex trauma, how it affected you, how it shaped the way you look at the world, yourself, how you cope, how you relate to other people. And I spend a lot of time on teaching that, and that is all to help you become aware of systems that previously have operated at a subconscious level that you need to bring to a conscious level if you're ever going to change. So that's part one, but we can't stop there. There's two other parts. The second is, what does a healthy life look like? So people say to me all the time, okay, you're helping me understand my unhealthy life. Thank you, appreciate it, but now what? What does healthy look like? And then the third part is, okay, what are the tools that will help me become healthy? And so basically what we're going to understand is that everybody is born with these 12 needs. And I'm not going to go through them. They're not in your notes. It's basically we have physical needs, we have emotional needs, we have relationship needs, we have intellectual needs, we have spiritual needs. What happens in complex trauma is those needs don't get met in a healthy way consistently, and the ways you try to meet them aren't healthy and often really screw you up. And so if a person's going to get healthy, they have to learn to meet those 12 needs in healthy ways. And so that's what we spend a lot of time with at React and helping people understand that. And basically the premise is this. In complex trauma, one of the things that happens to a child is they have a need. They vocalize that need to parents or to a teacher or to a sibling. That need does not get met. And so it is a need that now is a source of pain because it's not being met and it's unresolved. And so what the child has to do is adapt how they live to try and get that need met. The problem is they don't know healthy tools for doing that, so they tend to take one of the needs like food or sex or relationships and just say, let's do that all the time because it makes me feel good. And that becomes then an addiction. And so there's healthy ways of meeting all of those needs, and there's unhealthy ways. And if we step into unhealthy ways, it gives instant pleasure but long-term pain, and it leads to addiction. And so recovery becomes learning how to meet all 12 needs in a healthy way. And if we do, instead of unresolved emptiness and pain, we will begin to experience contentment, a sense of wholeness and completeness. There won't be that hole in the heart that we felt, and we will have a peace and serenity, a joy, a happiness. So I want to go through these 12 needs and begin to look at how do I meet that need in a healthy way. So we're going to start tonight with the very first need, that we're wired for pleasure. And I'm going to develop that in a bit, but I want to give you a bit to kind of lead into it, okay? So let me come at these 12 needs, and I've already said there's a healthy way and an unhealthy way. Unhealthy way, complex trauma, living in an unsafe environment where I'm afraid I'm going to get hurt, changes how I go about dealing with my 12 needs. So I was thinking of somebody I know that was raised in Holland in World War II, and he's told me stories about what it was like growing up. And so there were soldiers, German soldiers everywhere. They would come in, they would just take whatever they wanted. They would beat people up, abuse people, grab their food, break into their houses and take stuff. So that was the environment that they lived in. And as a little boy, he learned that if he cried in front of the soldiers, that made it worse. They then picked on him and bullied him even more. So how in a survival mode does that affect a person who still has 12 needs? Well, number one, you realize if I'm going to meet those 12 needs and people aren't going to help me meet them in healthy ways, this is no place for morals. You lie, you steal, you cheat, you do whatever you have to do to get those needs met. So when you're in survival mode, morals can't exist. In fact, you got to shut down your conscience, because if you have a conscience, that'll make you weak. So you close that down, you harden it, and then you can't love anybody, because to love somebody makes you weak and vulnerable. So you have to cut your heart and people out of your heart and harden your heart, because you don't want to care about anybody when you're trying to survive. And so you learn to manipulate people, to use people, but not to love people. And then you realize that you can't show most of your emotions. If you show sadness or fear, you get in trouble. It makes you weak. So what is happening? In order to survive physically, you have to die emotionally. In order to survive physically, you have to kill your soul. And that is the sad result of trying to meet your needs in an unsafe environment. And most of you understand that. You've done that. And what I want people to realize is that in survival mode, in order to get your needs met, you have to become less human. You have to cut out emotions. You have to cut out your conscience. And so you go from being fully human to less human, almost to a robot. Because that's what you have to do to survive, is shut everything down. And basically the only thing that you can allow to be displayed is anger. Lashing out. A hard, angry person, that helps you survive. Now with that, you still have 12 needs. So what do you do within that kind of emotional setting and hardening yourself and shutting yourself down to meet those needs? You take those needs and you distort them. So respect. You still want respect, but you know you're not going to be respected for being an honest, upright, moral person, because you're using... How do you get your respect need met? You make people afraid of you. And if they are afraid of you, they respect you out of fear, and it feels like that needs getting met, but it's not really. But that's what begins to happen. And then if you still want people to be loyal to you and committed to you, but you know they're not going to do it because you're a loving, caring, good, consistent person, so you create loyalty through fear. Don't rat me out. Don't do anything to expose all my bad stuff. You got to be loyal not to the good part of me, but to the bad part of me as well. And so you create all of that. So I hope you can realize you're still living with those needs. You're still trying to get those needs met, but you are no longer doing it in a healthy way, and it doesn't satisfy. So that takes us to pleasure. You still have a desire for pleasure, but stop and think about this child who shut everything down. They've got emptiness, pain, deadness, boredom inside because it's all shut off. They don't have any natural happiness or internal pleasure because they don't like themselves. They've shut out their conscience because they know they're doing stuff they shouldn't, trying to survive. So where do you get your pleasure need met? From the outside. You find things that will give you a rush. You find things that will give you a pleasure event. And you look to that to meet your pleasure need. Or you live in a fantasy world that says, if only I had more money, if only I had a better job, if only I had, then I would be happy. It's always out there, just beyond your reach. So that's what we're going to be looking at. So here's what I want you to understand about pleasure up front. Number one, complex trauma. because you live in a lack of safety and in survival mode and have to shut down in order to survive, complex trauma limits your capacity to experience true pleasure. Secondly, complex trauma distorts your whole pleasure network so that it's all external based and it doesn't come from the inside. So complex trauma greatly changes pleasure. And so I want to talk a bit more about understanding this and then how to get pleasure in healthy ways. Okay, so let me begin with this. A few years ago, as I looked at brain research, what jumped out at me was this, that our brain is wired for pleasure, not for pain. Do you realize that all of your brain chemicals except one are designed to give you good feelings? Dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, endorphins, all are about pleasure. Only one is there in case there's pain, and it's called cortisol, and its whole purpose is to give you the energy to solve the problem so you get out of pain and back into pleasure. And so what happens in complex trauma is the good chemicals hardly ever go off because so much pain is happening. Cortisol is pumping all the time. So the whole design of the brain is changed by complex trauma, and pleasure, the pleasure chemicals don't work the way they should. And the pain chemicals work over time. And so you're beginning to have to change that. But what I want you to understand is we're built for pleasure. We're built for healthy pleasure. And if you think about it, pleasure, one of the purposes of pleasure was to help us in making decisions. So if you think of going on a vacation, I doubt that some of you would want to go to a mosquito-infested swamp. You want to go to a beautiful place where you're going to be in awe of the beauty of nature. That's a pleasure thing. When you think about what you're going to eat for supper, it's not your least favorite food, it's your most favorite food that gives you the greatest pleasure. So pleasure guides me and maybe most of the decisions that we make throughout a day. Okay, so that's one purpose of pleasure. Let me give you a few other purposes of pleasure. If you look at the natural things that give us the greatest pleasure, it's food and sex. Guess what the purpose of food and sex are? They keep humans alive and they keep the human race happening. So it's like God said, I'm going to make these people and I want them to have fun in these two areas, to have the greatest fun so that the human race doesn't burn out within a couple generations. I want them to have lots of kids. Now some get carried away and all of that. But it was designed to keep the human race alive, okay? Secondly, and this is where complex trauma will start to distort it, but the original design is when you do a good thing, you feel good about it. When you do a good thing, there's the reward of pleasure for having done the right thing. And what does that make you want to do? Do it again. So if you're training a dog or you're training a child and they do a good thing, you give a dog a treat and you give the child a gold star. And you clap for them and you applaud them. And what do they want to do? They want to do that good thing again. Now, in complex trauma, you maybe didn't get that kind of validation, which is sad. You didn't get rewarded for doing the good stuff, but you got attention when you did the bad stuff, and that became a source of pleasure for you of doing the bad stuff because then you got validation. See how it got twisted there? The next thing, if you function where you're really gifted and have good talent and ability, you get pleasure from serving and working in that area. If you try to work on a job that you are useless at, you get no pleasure. It is constant frustration. Pleasure helps us figure out what we're good at, and it rewards us for serving in those areas. Next, once you've done something, so let's say I'm going through a time of depression, and I say I'm going to keep doing the right thing. I'm going to keep loving people. I'm going to keep getting out of bed and doing stuff. even though I don't get an instant reward emotionally for that, I'm going to do it. Why? Because I've been at this long enough that I know that in time, I'm going to be glad I did. So that there will be a reward coming, not today, but down the road, but it will come. And that gives me the will or desire to persevere even though I'm going through a tough time right now. The next thing I want you to understand is this, and complex trauma, again, really messes this one up. We get the greatest pleasure from connection with people. Sadly, complex trauma is lack of healthy connection. And so with complex trauma, you don't naturally enjoy the greatest source of pleasure, which is healthy connection with other people. But I want you to file that away because we're going to come back to that because it's really important as you move forward in how to experience pleasure in healthy ways. Okay, next thing, there are different types of pleasure. Usually when we think of pleasure, we think of physical pleasure, food, sex, all of those kinds of things. But there's emotional pleasure. There is intellectual pleasure when you learn something or figure something out. There is relational pleasure when you've had a heart-to-heart talk with somebody who hasn't judged you but just loved you and accepted you. That feels so good. And then there's spiritual pleasure, connecting with a higher power. All kinds of different sources and types of pleasure. Okay, now we're going to come to the key fact. Pleasure does not equal true happiness. If you're an addict, you understand that. Is addiction chasing pleasure but not being happy? You have a high, but you sure aren't happy. You're dead inside. There's an emptiness. There's a hole in your heart. So you chase pleasure more than anybody else in the world and are the least happy of most of the people in the world. So just experiencing pleasure doesn't equal being truly happy. You can take that too from complex trauma. If you don't have anything good happening inside, there's lots of pain and emptiness and unresolved needs and hurts and losses. You can chase all kinds of adrenaline rushes and highs and activities to try to get pleasure, but you feel dead inside. I don't know if you've ever heard the term hedonism or a hedonist. It's a person who lives for pleasure. So hedonism is the Greek word for pleasure. So a hedonist is a person who devotes themselves to living for nothing but chasing pleasure. You want to know what happens for most hedonists? They have day after day with pleasure and they feel totally dead inside. So that is important to understand. So let's then go, what's the difference between pleasure and true happiness, okay? So pleasure. Pleasure is brain chemicals released, and then you experience brain pleasure. So it usually has an instant gratification. It involves mainly dopamine, and it's about your limbic brain. Remember that, okay? So it's all about brain chemicals being released in your brain. What does that come from? Well, you can get dopamine released by having a perfect day. No hassles, nobody bugs you, kids serve you, want to help you, everybody is great and kind to you, people give you money for no good reason, and you go, this is a rush. It releases chemicals. Having good external circumstances can release dopamine, okay? Doesn't happen very often, but it can happen. And a lot of people chase that perfect world. Second thing, you can bring in artificial dopamine chemicals through drugs and alcohol. And most of you have done that. Or activities release dopamine in the brain. So food, we talked about, sex. So you can end up with food addiction, sex addiction, porn addiction. Do you know that buying something releases dopamine? Shopping addiction. Do you know that something new releases dopamine? A new shopping addiction. All kinds of different activities can release dopamine. Sports, competition, winning, all releases dopamine. Adrenaline rush activities, extreme sports, release dopamine. So you can have all kinds of things releasing dopamine, but here's what I want you to understand with all of that. You realize that most of those were external things. Things that happened on the outside, circumstances, things that you did activity-wise. Now here's what really concerns me. If you look at our culture today, what it is trying to sell us is if you have enough pleasure, you'll be happy. If you indulge your food appetite, your sex appetite, your money appetite, then you will be happy. You realize that's a lie. Because it is saying happiness comes from having or doing these external activities. But our culture is buying into it. And if you're trying to get recovery in a culture like this, it's easy to be influenced by that culture without even realizing it. So I don't know if you've ever heard the phrase having an idol. So we have American Idol, but they used to have religious idols that they would put on their shelf and then they would light incense to it or bow before it. Here's what I want you to understand what an idol means. It is if I am looking for something to make me totally happy, that becomes an idol to me. So what I am saying is I think you should be my God and that you should fix all my problems and make me happy. And that could be a person, that could be an activity, that could be a possession. But it's anything that we're putting all our eggs in that basket to make us happy becomes an idol. And then that controls us. And our life revolves around that. Okay, so that's pleasure. Now I want you to think, what is true happiness? And I'm going to go through a list here. And I hope that some of it you're going to see very quickly, but others you're going to go, wow, that's the opposite of what I've been told. That's the opposite of what my culture tells me. And it's the opposite of what came out of complex trauma. So number one, happiness. Part of the recipe for happiness is meeting my 12 needs in healthy, consistent ways. Okay? Part one. Part two, I can't be healthy or happy unless I have a clear conscience. So if I violate morals and I lie or steal or cheat, I need to resolve that so that I can get my guilt cleared up so it's not eating away at me. So there's an element there. Thirdly, I have to be able to forgive myself. I don't just have to do an amends and resolve what I've done wrong. I have to stop punishing myself, being down on myself, thinking I don't deserve to be treated well. So there has to be self-forgiveness before I can ever be truly happy. So you just take those top three. That's an important but very big task to begin to get all of that. Fourth, I have to have connection. And that means not just connection with other people, but that means connection with myself. What does complex trauma do? I feel abandoned by everybody else, so I'm going to abandon me as well. Because I must be a total loser if everybody else abandoned me, so I am not even going to connect with myself. I will be constantly distracted so I don't have to live in my own skin. And so now I have to connect with myself. And then in connecting with others, it can't just be superficial stuff. I need 1, 2 people where I can get really honest and I can begin to share and be authentic and not be judged, but be accepted. That is so important. And for most people, they realize they need a connection with a higher power. Next one, I have to be able to accept love from others. So if people try to love me, it makes you all uncomfortable. And you go, I don't deserve this. This is weird. They probably don't mean it. Blah, blah, blah. You do all of that. But I have to be able to begin to allow love to sink in, to allow it to touch me and believe it. And I have to be able to love myself and allow others to show love to me. And that becomes a very important part of true happiness. Next, and this is where it's going to start to get weird. What happens when you're in survival mode? You go into control mode. I can't be happy unless I'm in control, because if I'm not in control, I'm going to get hurt and my needs aren't going to get met. But what you then begin to realize is I'm not strong enough to handle all the problems of the world. So if I'm ever going to be happy, I have to be able to trust others and surrender control. Now that makes you scared right away. But do you see that? You know that, seeing the look in a child's eye of pure delight when they jump into their arms? Why? Because they trust you and they surrender to you. And they know you got their back. And you're their rock. They don't have to worry about all that stuff. You got it covered. And so they're able to experience a peace and serenity and happiness because of trust and surrender. So that is, deep down, a key part of true happiness. If I have to be in control and I can't give that up, I'll never be happy. Next one. Happiness has morality. So if I lie and cheat and steal, I won't be happy because I'm breaking some internal code that's bothering my conscience. So I put up here about boundaries. In other words, happiness can only happen if you live within the right boundaries. So in the middle of those two lines are all the healthy ways of meeting those 12 needs. So I can look at food. I can use food in a healthy way to feed my body, or I can step outside of those lines and say, I'm going to use food not just to meet my physical needs, I'm going to eat my emotions away. And I'm going to use food to try to make me feel better emotionally. So I am now going outside of the design for food to unhealthy use of food. And here's what happens. It makes me feel good instantly. And what happens in my brain? You got to do that again. That was great. That gave me pleasure. But how do I know that it's unhealthy use of food? Because over time, I'll start to get more and more negative consequences. And it will become not a source of pleasure, but a source of pain. And so, if I'm going to be happy, I have to live within boundaries for every single one of the needs that I have in my life. So let me just say this to parents. So if you go back to this here, guess where every kid wants to spend their life? Outside of healthy. Because their brain doesn't want to eat potatoes and vegetables. They want chocolate bars and ice cream. It gives instant gratification. So guess what your job is as a parent? Is to say, my child wants to live out of a limbic brain, which is going to take him into unhealthy uses of all the gifts that we have in meeting our needs. So I got to be the cortex brain and think ahead and say, no, we're going to live within these boundaries. And a lot of parents don't want to do that because the kids say, you're mean. I don't like you as a parent. All my friends get to eat chocolate bars, and you feel like you're the mean ogre. But what happens if you set those boundaries? The kids will squawk for a while, but over time, one day they're going to say, thank you for showing me how to meet my needs in a healthy way. I appreciate it so much. And all of a sudden, they're going to go from thinking you're a loser to wondering, how did you get so smart? Okay, next and final thing I want to say about this is just to reiterate again, what complex trauma does to the pleasure system is it makes healthy meeting of needs impossible because you're trying to survive. So you have to live in the unhealthy, outside of the boundaries of healthy, to try to get your needs met, and that gives you pleasure. Because you do all of these things that aren't healthy, but they give you instant gratification. And so the challenge for people like that, and you've all experienced it, is it might not happen in the first year or the second year, but it's going to happen soon, where it's going to go from pleasure to emptiness to pain. And then you get to a point where you say, I can't live outside these boundaries anymore. Now you got to figure out how to live inside those boundaries when your brain has been programmed to live outside of them. So the challenge of recovery is going from a life outside in the pleasure but unhealthy and therefore not happy to the healthy, which leads to true happiness. So those are the components for what happiness, the recipe for happiness. Now let me just end with this. Where do you start? So understand that the greatest pleasure is not physical. The greatest pleasure is connection in healthy relationships. Therefore, you're never going to be happy if you live in isolation. At some point, you got to enter the world of building some friendships. Secondly, happiness and true pleasure, healthy pleasure, is the byproduct of pursuing healthy things. If you decide I'm just going to pursue pleasure, you're never going to find it. But if you say I'm going to pursue loving people, serving, living a healthy life, pursuing healthy relationships, giving, you're not pursuing pleasure per se, you're pursuing a healthy life, and then pleasure just comes along for the ride. And pretty soon you go, wow, I've never been so happy, and I'm not even trying to find pleasure, I'm just trying to get healthy. And it comes with that. So to make pleasure your goal is to lose and never find pleasure. So sadly, there's been a lot of people over the years that if you're having fun, they say, don't have fun. And it's like you should never enjoy food. You should not enjoy sex. Sex is bad or something. No, what I want you to hear is we were given these wonderful, healthy ways of meeting our 12 needs. Enjoy them, but inside of healthy. That becomes a challenge because built into enjoying the gifts of good food and sex and relationships, our brain, if we've been in complex trauma, says, let's overdo it. Let's go 100% into sex. Let's go 100% into exercise. And let's forget everything else. And before you know it, we're out of balance again. So the challenge in recovery is enjoying the gifts inside the boundaries and keeping it in balance. So if you stop and look at those ingredients for balance or for happiness, what you begin to go is, it almost seems like they're the ingredients for a miserable life. You got to have morals. You got to have boundaries. You got to serve and love. That doesn't sound like a recipe for pleasure. It sounds like a recipe for, I don't know, a dead life. But once you begin to do those things, you go, I think I finally found the thing I've been looking for that leads as a byproduct to a very satisfying life.